I went 5 days without hearing my daughter's voice, and on the morning of the 6th, I threw a bag in the truck and drove 3 hours straight to her house with my hands locked on the wheel the whole way. What I found there was my granddaughter, 8 years old, folded up in the dark under the basement stairs, so weak she couldn't lift her own head. The first thing I'd other side of the seven was, "Wonderful the both my wage." I've turned those words over in my mind 1,000 times since. Sometimes the truth comes out of the smallest mouth in the quietest voice you ever heard. What my granddaughter lived through that week pulled the lid off something rotten, a thing built out of debt and greed and a $600,000 life insurance policy. And it taught me that justice doesn't always knock on the front door. Sometimes you have to drag it out of the dark yourself. Before I tell you about those 5 days of silence and the phone that wouldn't ring, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button and drop a comment letting me know what town you're watching from. It means more than you know to an old man telling you the worst story of his life. I'm 63 years old. I drove a rig for 31 years, long hauls mostly, and if there's one thing the road teaches you, it's the difference between a normal sound and a wrong one. An engine that's about to throw a rod tells you days before it goes. People are the same way if you pay attention. My daughter and I had a standing call every Sunday at 6 in the evening, right after I'd had my supper and right before she put my granddaughter to bed. We've been doing it for years, ever since her mother passed, and it was just the two of us holding the family up between us. Megan never missed it. Even after the divorce went through 4 months back, even with everything falling on her at once, she called at 6 on the dot, and I'd hear my granddaughter hollering in the background, "Tell Grandpa hi! Tell Grandpa I lost a tooth." And that was the best part of my whole week. That Sunday, the phone didn't ring. I sat at the kitchen table with the news on low and watched the clock crawl past 6, then 6:15. Then 1/2 past. I figured she'd gotten busy. Megan worked as the office manager for a dental practice, and she was always running behind, always somebody needing one more thing from her. I called her around 7, straight to voicemail. "Hey, sweetheart, it's your old man. Just checking in on you and the little one. Call me back." I told myself it was nothing. There was a nice storm coming through that part of the state. I'd seen it on the weather, and I figured the lines or the power were acting up. Monday I called twice, voicemailed both times. By then the knot was starting to tighten in my gut, that same feeling I'd get hauling through a mountain pass, when the brakes started fading and I knew I had a problem I couldn't see yet. Tuesday I called the dental office. A young woman answered, real cheerful until I said my daughter's name, and then her voice went careful. She said Megan hadn't come in since Friday, that she'd called out and nobody had heard from her, that everybody'd figured she had the flu going around. Hadn't come in since Friday. It was Tuesday. My daughter was the most reliable person I ever raised, and she'd dropped off the face of the earth for 3 days and nobody had so much as driven by to check. I started making calls like a man possessed. I tried my granddaughter's school. The front office said she'd been marked absent all week, no note, no call from a parent, and they'd left 2 messages that went nowhere. I called Megan's next-door neighbor, a retired school teacher named Mrs. Calloway who'd known my daughter for years. Her voice came down to a whisper. The way people talk when they're scared, they already know the answer. She said she'd seen the lights on Sunday night, late, and a strange car in the driveway. But Megan's car had been gone since Monday morning, and she hadn't laid eyes on either of them since. She said she had thought about knocking, but it hadn't felt like her business. I told her it wasn't her fault, and I believed it when I said it, but I could hear in her voice that she'd carry it anyway. Here's the part I have to tell you straight, because I've read what some folks say and I understand the question. I did not just sit on my hands. Tuesday night I called the sheriff's department in her county and asked them to send somebody out for a welfare check. I gave them the address, told them my daughter was missing, told them there was a child in that house. A deputy went by Wednesday morning. He called me back that afternoon. polite enough, and told me the house looked buttoned up tight, no car in the drive, lights off, no answer at the door, no sign of forced entry, nothing out of place from the curb. He said without more to go on, and without anybody's permission, he couldn't legally go inside, and that grown women were allowed to take a trip without telling their daddy. He suggested maybe she'd gone off to clear her head after the divorce. I wanted to reach through the phone, but the law's the law, and from the road, a tidy house with no car in the drive looks like an empty house. What that deputy didn't know, what none of us knew yet, was that the car had been moved on purpose, parked at a commuter lot 2 towns over to sell the story that my daughter had run off on her own. I didn't sleep Wednesday or Thursday. I lay in the dark and listened to that wrong sound getting louder. Friday morning, I quit pretending. I packed a bag like I was going off to war, spare clothes, my blood pressure pills, the key to her place she'd given me the Christmas before, and I pointed the truck east and didn't stop except for gas. The whole way I rehearsed reasons it'd be fine. She fell asleep with her phone off. She took the girl to a water park. Her ex had them for an extra weekend. But that wrong sound just kept on. And somewhere around the 2nd hour, I quit lying to myself and just drove faster. Her subdivision was one of those new ones where every house wears the same face. I pulled up and the first thing I noticed was the ice still laced on the porch steps from the storm. Untouched, no footprints, and 3 days of newspaper swelled up fat with melt and refreeze by the door. The driveway was empty. The porch was empty. Everything was quiet in a way that a house with an 8-year-old in it has no business being. I knocked. I rang the bell. I called her name through the door until my voice cracked. Then I tried the handle and it turned, and that stopped my heart cold because Megan never left a door unlocked. Not after the divorce, not for anything. The living room hit me wrong the second I stepped in. A lamp was knocked off its table, and somebody had stood it back up crooked, the shade dented. The rug was rubbed up at one corner, like something had been dragged across it. There was a dark stain worked into the grout between the tiles by the entryway that somebody had scrubbed at but hadn't gotten all the way up. 30 years of reading, damn it, told me what scrubbing looks like when somebody's in a hurry and afraid. I moved through that house room by room, calling out, my own voice coming back at me off the walls. The kitchen had dishes gone hard and gray in the sink. The coffee maker was still switched on. The pot cooked down to black tar that had been burning the element for days. My daughter would never. She would never. I almost missed her. I went up and checked the bedrooms first. My granddaughter's little room with the horse posters, Megan's room with the bed half made, and found nothing but the smell of a house going stale. I was standing in the kitchen wondering whether to scream or call the law again when I heard it. A sound from under my feet. A faint, slow scratching, like a mouse working at a board, coming up through the floor. The basement door was off the kitchen. I yanked it open and went down those stairs faster than a man my age has any right to, calling her name. And at the bottom I stopped and listened and heard it again, off to the side, behind the staircase itself, in the dark cubby where she stored the Christmas boxes. "Hazel," I said. "Honey, is that you? It's Grandpa." 3 slow taps answered me. Knuckles on wood, deliberate, the last strength a body has. I dropped to my knees and pulled the boxes aside, and there she was, my granddaughter, wedged into the farthest corner of that crawl space with her knees up to her chin and a little stuffed fox clutched against her chest, the one she called Copper, that she'd had since she was a baby. Her lips were split and white, her eyes barely opened. But when she saw my face, the corner of her mouth pulled up like it weighed 100 pounds, and she breathed out one word. "Grandpa." I will hear that sound in my head until the day I die. She was burning up and bone dry. I got my hands under her, and she weighed about as much as a sack of feed, all sharp little bones. Around her on the concrete were the leavings of how she'd kept herself alive. A couple of empty juice pouches, a cracker sleeve picked clean, a plastic cup. There was a utility sink down there by the water heater, and the floor between it and her hiding spot had little scuff marks where she'd crawled back and forth for water when her legs wouldn't hold her up to walk. 5 days old, and she'd rationed and crawled and waited just like her mother taught her, because somewhere in this child's head was the belief that if she stayed put and stayed quiet, the bad would pass and somebody would come. "Where's your mama, baby?" I asked her, and I shouldn't have, because I didn't have anything ready for the answer. She turned her face into my shoulder. "She told me to go to my spot," she whispered. She said, "Don't come out, not for anything, not till she says the word." "I've been waiting for the word, Grandpa." Her voice broke into the smallest, driest sob I've ever heard. She never said the word. I had my phone out and my thumb shaking too hard to hit the numbers. I got it eventually. 3 numbers. The dispatcher asked me my emergency, and I heard my own voice come out of me sounding like somebody I didn't know. "My granddaughter's alive, but she's bad off, and my daughter's gone, and I think something terrible happened in this house." I gave the address twice because my mouth wasn't working right. I sat down on those cold basement stairs with that little girl in my lap, her cheek against my neck, her breath shallow but going, and while we waited for the sirens, one question pressed down on me so hard I could barely breathe under it. If Hazel had been hiding in that hole for 5 days, where in God's name was Megan? The paramedics came down the stairs careful and quick, and one of them, the lead one, a calm fellow with steady hands, got a line in her arm and an oxygen mask over her little face while he talked her vitals into his radio. "Severe dehydration," he said. "Malnourished. 80-year-old female, responsive but weak. They let me ride along because she wouldn't let go of 2 of my fingers, and every time the rig hit a bump, she'd squeeze, just to be sure I was still there." At the children's hospital, they wheeled her behind a curtain, and a young nurse took me by the elbow and sat me down with a clipboard. She asked if I was the father. "Grandfather," I told her. "Her mother's missing." The word came out of my mouth and tasted like rust. A couple hours in, the doctor found me. He said she was stable, that she'd come back with fluids and time, that there was no lasting damage to the body. He looked at me a long moment and said, 5 days alone is a long time for a grown adult. For a child that age, what she did to keep herself alive, I've rarely seen the like. That is one tough little girl." Before I could thank him, a man in a gray coat came up the hall, badge on his belt, a tired look on him like he'd seen the bottom of too many days. "Detective Ramos," he said. He had questions and I had a story, and I laid it all out for him. The missed Sunday call, the silence, the welfare check that came up empty, the unlocked door, the lamp, the stain in the grout. He wrote it all down. He asked if my daughter had any reason to take off. Money trouble, a man, anything. She wouldn't leave her child in a basement, I said, and it came out harder than I meant. "You don't know my Megan. Something happened to her in that house." He held my eyes for a beat and then nodded slow, and something in his face changed from going through the motions to something graver. "All right, Mr. Bishop," he said. "We'll treat it like that. Can I talk to the girl? She's been through hell. You be gentle with her." Her hospital room was too bright and too white, but she lit up when she saw me come through the door, and that was the first real smile of that whole black day. The fluids had put a little color back in her cheeks. Detective Ramos pulled a chair up slow and kept his voice soft, the way you'd talk to a spooked animal. He told her his name, told her he was trying to find her mama, asked her real gentle about the last time she saw her. Her little hand found mine under the blanket and squeezed. "It was the night it was icy," she whispered. "There was yelling. Daddy was yelling." The floor dropped out from under me. Daddy. I should tell you about her daddy. My ex-son-in-law, a fellow named Cody, was the kind of man who could charm the chrome off a bumper and never hold a job past a year. When he and Megan married, I had my doubts, but she loved him and I kept my mouth shut, which is a thing I'll always wonder about. He got into the betting apps a couple years back, the ones on every commercial now, and what started as $20 on a football game turned into something that ate him alive. By the end of the marriage, he'd run them tens of thousands into the hole, borrowed against the house, borrowed off worse people than banks. Megan finally put him out 4 months before all this. She got the girl, the house, what was left. He got a court order to pay support he never paid, and a grudge he carried like a loaded gun. Detective Ramos kept his voice even. "Honey, can you tell me what you heard that night?" Hazel's grip on my hand went tight. "Mommy told me to go to my spot under the stairs and be a mouse. So I did. I heard Daddy and a lady. The lady has a scratchy voice. They were saying Mommy owed them money, lots of money, and Mommy was crying and saying she didn't have it." Tears slid down her face, but her voice stayed steady. "The bravest thing I ever saw. Then there was a big bang, like when something heavy falls, and then it got quiet. Real quiet. I wanted to come out and find Mommy, but she didn't say the word, so I stayed like she told me. She looked up at me. Did I do good, Grandpa? Did I stay quiet enough?" I couldn't answer her. I just held her hand and let the tears run down into my collar. Ramos stepped out into the hall and I followed him on legs that didn't feel like mine. He told me what I already knew in my bones. This was no longer a missing person case. He said the words, "homicide investigation," out loud, and then he told me they'd already pulled my daughter's financials and there was a life insurance policy on her, $600,000, taken out years back when she and Cody were married and happy and planning a future. And after the divorce, 4 months ago, she'd never changed the beneficiary. Cody was still listed. She'd meant to get to it. Folks always mean to get to it. Paperwork's the last thing on your mind when your whole life is coming apart and you've got a child to keep fed. 2 days later, Ramos asked me to come back to the house. The crime scene tape was up, that yellow ribbon snapping in the cold wind, and I didn't want to go in, but I needed to see it through for Megan. The forensics people had been thorough. They sprayed the entryway with their chemicals, and the dark turned to a glow that showed what the scrubbing had hidden. A spray across the baseboard and a wide stain worked deep into the grout where my daughter had gone down and struck the sharp edge of the tile step. She fell hard or was pushed hard. Ramos told me quiet, caught her head on the corner. It would have been fast. I stood there looking at the spot where my girl died, and I made my hands into fists so I wouldn't put one through the wall. The pieces came together fast after that, the way they do once the first one drops. Cody had been into a man, not a bank. A man for better than $90,000 in gambling debt, and that man had stopped being patient. The scratchy-voiced lady my granddaughter heard turned out to be Cody's new girlfriend, a woman named Tanya he'd taken up with before the ink dried on the divorce. A neighbor's doorbell camera 2 houses down had caught a sedan rolling slow up the street that icy Sunday night, blurry but there. Around the time Hazel said the yelling started, they ran the plate. It came back to Tanya, and the dental office when Ramos pulled the records showed that Megan had told her supervisor just that week that her ex was pressuring her about money she didn't have and that she was scared. They picked up Cody first at a buddy's apartment across town where he'd been laying low. Ramos said he didn't run, just sat down at the table and started sweating and asking for a lawyer, and then talking anyway the way guilty men do when the thing's too big to hold. I watched through the glass. He looked smaller than I remembered, gray and shaking. He swore up and down it wasn't supposed to go like that. He said Tanya had cooked the whole thing up, that the plan was just to scare Megan into signing over the house so they could pull the equity, that nobody was supposed to get hurt. But then he said the part that turned my stomach to ice. He said it was Tanya who'd brought up the insurance. Tanya who'd looked it up, who knew Megan had never taken his name off it, who said out loud that a dead ex-wife was worth $600,000 and a live one was worth nothing but child support payments he couldn't make. He said when Megan refused to sign and told them to get out of her house, Tanya shoved her and Megan went back and down and hit the step, and there was so much blood. and Tanya said they had to make it disappear or they'd both go away forever. "Where is she?" Ramos asked him. "Where's Megan Bishop?" Cody put his face in his cuffed hands. "There's a storage place out on the county road," he said. "Unit 119. Tanya rented it. Paid cash, gave a fake name." He looked up, and I swear he looked right through the glass at me even though he couldn't see me. I didn't know about insurance till after. I swear to God I didn't. Ramos came out and found me with my forehead against the cold cinder block wall. He put a hand on my shoulder. "The unit checks out," he said. "We found her." And just like that, the last thread of hope I'd been carrying without admitting it snapped clean, and I had to grab the wall to keep my feet. Hearing it said out loud made it real in a way nothing else had. My daughter, my Megan, who I taught to ride a bike and walk down an aisle, locked in a steel box on a county road, while her own little girl rationed crackers in the dark 20 miles away. Tanya was harder to catch. She'd cleared out of her apartment and was moving motel to motel paying cash, the way people do when they've watched too many shows and think they're smart. But desperation makes folks careless. She called her sister down in Texas, and they traced the tower, and 3 days later, they took her at a bus station with a duffel of cash, a fresh dyed head of hair, and a driver's license in a name that wasn't hers, and a ticket south. I drove down to the station because I had to see her with my own eyes. Through the cruiser window, she looked nothing like the smiling woman in the one photo I'd seen on Cody's phone. She looked cornered and mean. When she caught me staring, she didn't look away. She held my eye like she was daring me, and then her face just went flat and bored, and that was somehow the worst thing of all. In the interview room, she didn't fall apart like Cody. She tried to run it backward, said it was all his idea, said she was just along for the ride, said Cody was the one who lost his temper. But Ramos laid the storage receipt on the table, rented under her fake name, paid with her cash, and he laid Cody's statement next to it, and he asked her how a woman just along for the ride was the one who knew the exact dollar figure on a dead woman's insurance policy. That's when something cracked. She started screaming about how Cody owed everybody, how she was about to lose everything because of his debts, how nobody understood the spot she was in. Ramos asked her, real quiet, "What about the little girl in the basement?" And for half a second, I saw something human move behind her eyes. "She wasn't supposed to be home," Tanya said. "He told me the kid was at her grandfather's that week." Then the flat look came back down like a shade pulled over a window. She'd ordered a child's mother killed, and her only regret was that the child had been close enough to hear it happen. They charged them both with murder. The county prosecutor, a sharp woman who looked Hazel in the eye and promised her she'd be safe, said she'd be asking for the maximum, and the judge denied them both bail. And then came the part nobody tells you about, the waiting. The months. Folks who've never been through it think the trial happens the next week like on television. It doesn't. It was nearly 7 months between the day I found my granddaughter in that basement and the day we walked into that courthouse. 7 months of building a life out of the wreckage. I got temporary custody quick enough, being her only bloodkin left who could take her. And then I went and got it made permanent. I sold my little place and bought a house in her school district so she wouldn't have to lose her friends on top of everything else. There was a child psychologist, Dr. Tilde Sloan, a patient woman with kind eyes who saw Hazel twice a week and taught me how to sit with a child who wakes up screaming and not try to fix it, just hold on. The trial about broke me and the both of us. The prosecutor walked the jury through all of it. The photos, the forensics, the financial records that showed Cody drowning in gambling debt, and the insurance policy sitting there like a loaded trap. But it was Hazel who turned it. They'd fought to keep her off the stand, and Dr. Sully. Sloan worried over it, but in the end, my granddaughter wanted to do it. She wanted to speak for her mama. She climbed up into that big witness chair, looking smaller than she'd ever looked, with Copper the Fox waiting for her on my lap in the front row because they wouldn't let her bring him up there. And she told that whole courtroom what she told us in the hospital. She told them about the icy night and the yelling and the bang and the quiet. And then she said, and I watched grown jurors put their hands over their mouths. Mommy told me she'd say the word when it was safe. I waited a real long time. I counted 5 sleeps, but she never said it. I think she couldn't. Cody took a plea in the end and got 25 years, and on the stand, he turned on Tanya completely. Told the jury she'd planned every step, that she'd known about the insurance from the start, that the talk about scaring Megan into signing the house was just the cover story she'd fed him to get him in the door. He said the reason he was finally telling the truth was that he couldn't stop seeing his own daughter counting sleeps in a basement. Tanya's lawyer tried to paint her as a desperate woman pushed past her limit, but you can't sell desperation to 12 people who've just heard an 8-year-old count to 5. The jury was out 4 hours. Guilty. Every count. She got life with no parole. As the foreman read it out, Tanya finally cried, and I felt nothing watching it. Not satisfaction, not peace, just a great gray emptiness, because none of it brought my daughter back up those basement stairs. It's been a little over a year now. Hazel and I have found our way into a rhythm, the two of us. The nightmares come less than they did. She's got a tooth coming in to replace the one she lost the week before everything happened, and she made me promise to put it under her pillow, even though she says she's too old to believe in the tooth fairy, and I put $2 under there because some promises you keep no matter what. The insurance money, the very money Tanya killed for, came to Hazel in the end, set aside in a trust for her schooling and her future, and there's a hard kind of justice in that I still can't quite swallow. Blood money paying for a good life, but Megan would have wanted her girl taken care of. So I take care of her girl, and I let the bitterness sit where it has to sit. This past Saturday, I had her out in the garage with me while I worked on the truck, and I was showing her how to check the oil, her little hands gripping the dipstick rag, her face dead serious like it was the most important job in the world. She was quiet a while, the way she gets, and then she looked up at me with the smudge of grease on her cheek and asked, "Grandpa, do you think Mommy can see me from heaven?" I had to set my wrench down. "Baby," I said, and my voice came out rough, "I think your mama sees everything you do, and I think every time you're brave, and every time you're kind, she's up there about busting with pride." Hazel thought about that. Real careful, the way she thinks about everything now. Then she leaned her head against my arm and said, "Then I'm gonna be brave a lot." And out there in that cold garage with the smell of motor oil and my granddaughter's hair under my chin, I understood that the worst thing that ever happened to me had also handed me the one thing worth living the rest of my days for. I lost my daughter, but she left her best work behind, breathing and warm and leaning on my arm, and as long as I've got breath in me, that little girl will grow up knowing exactly how much she was loved and exactly how hard the people who loved her fought to bring her home. I've had over a year now to sit with what happened to my Megan, and the thing I keep landing on is how a tragedy that size is never really one bad decision. It's 100 small ones lined up like dominoes. Cody placed the first $20 on a ball game and told himself it was nothing. He borrowed the first time and told himself he'd pay it back by Friday. By the time Tanya whispered to him about an insurance policy, nobody had bothered to change. The man had already spent years teaching himself that the easy way out was the only way worth taking. Nobody wakes up a killer. You become one in installments, and every installment feels small while you're paying it. That's the part I'd want a stranger watching this to carry home, especially if you've got young ones looking up to you. The line between the man who pays his debts and the man who hides a body in a storage unit is built one honest choice at a time, long before the night anything goes wrong. Megan never had Cody's kind of money, but she had something he traded away cheap, and that was the simple decision to do right when doing right cost her. She put him out instead of enabling him. She kept the lights on for her daughter. She lost her life for refusing to sign over what wasn't his to take, and I will not let anyone tell me she lost. A person who holds the line under that kind of pressure has already won the only fight that counts. But being good isn't enough by itself, and I learned that the hard way too. I trusted that quiet feeling in my gut for 30 years on the road, and the 1 week I let a tidy-looking house and a polite deputy talk me out of it, my daughter was already gone. Wisdom is just paying attention to the wrong sound before it becomes a wreck, and then having the sense to act even when everyone tells you you're being a foolish old man. Megan had that wisdom in her bones. She didn't waste those last seconds begging. She sent Hazel to her spot and told her to wait for the word, and that one clear-headed instruction is the only reason my granddaughter is alive to grow up. And then there's the kind of toughness that has nothing to do with being big or strong. Hazel was 8 years old in a dark basement for 5 days, and she rationed her crackers, crawled to the sink when her legs gave out, and held on because her mama told her to. Grit like that can't be bought or faked. It's what's left when everything else is stripped away. So if you take one thing from an old man's worst story, take this. Raise your kids and live your own life so that when the dark comes, and it comes for everybody, what's underneath you is solid. Be the person who does right when it costs you, who sees trouble coming and moves, and who simply refuses to quit. That's the whole inheritance worth leaving.